We're just going to cover, oh, thanks. We're going to cover 3 tools today, okay? Hopefully this is a review for some folks, but if not, then you have some guidelines on how to use these tools and how to construct them. The one thing that I'm going to preface this by is that I've gotten away from saying how to do this in Excel simply because there are so many versions of Excel out there now, and they, for whatever reason, Microsoft, I guess under the guise of adding features, keeps changing how charts are built, and they now recommend charts in Office 365 and Excel 2016. They did that in the past, but it wasn't a very workable function. So if you're going to do this and you have an older version like 2007 or something like that, I found that Google is a really good source of information for some of the older versions of Excel, especially on how to do charts. Because now with the new Office 365 version of Excel, it's become a little more complex too. So avail yourselves of that. It'll be worthwhile. And so let's get started. So there's just 3 things that I'm going to talk about today. One is a histogram, another is a Pareto chart, and the last one is a scatter plot. I'll talk about what they're used for. This is by no means something that you would find in a master's level statistics class. It's basic preliminary information, and I think for the most part, it'll be helpful to hopefully all of you, but it'll be helpful for probably 90% of the things you're going to use it for and doing deeper dives into your data. So without any further ado, let's talk about the histogram first. So hopefully everybody has seen something like this. In this case, I chose an example of the age ranges in a program of the program's consumers. You could use this for so many things, but if you notice a couple of things, number one, there's these big bars, right? And they're kind of compressed, not compressed together, but pushed together. That is a typical histogram. So the bars show the frequency of occurrence as opposed to how many, okay? It translates to how many, right? So if I look at the big bar here, ages 36 to 41, I have about 40, let's say 47 people that are aged 36 to 41. That tells me something, okay? That tells me that I need to be thinking if my programming is going to be well received by people in that age. And I'm also looking at this histogram, and I'm looking at a population that's really from 36 to 53, if you look at the 3 bars to the right. So that also tells me something. Sorry, my mouse gets a mind of its own sometimes. So again, we're dealing with frequency distributions and not necessarily raw numbers. If it were raw numbers, you could do a line chart. You could do a bar chart. You could do a pie chart in some cases. The histogram is used for one variable. In the case of this chart, it's age, right? And we have a number of different values, or in this case, bins, within the age brackets. Histograms really are kind of data hungry. They like a lot of data, right? You don't want to do a histogram with about 10 data points. It just wouldn't really show you too much of anything. You could use viral suppression. You could use anything that's got a number of data points. Okay, so there's a couple of things to remember in histograms, and there's some terms that I wanted to go over because they tend to get very confusing depending upon what you're reading, right? The variables There's continuous variable histograms and there's discrete variable histograms. Chances are you're going to be dealing with discrete variable histograms. They have a limited number of values and they're counted in a finite time period. If you look at age can be either one, right? The example at the top under continuous looks at age as like 25 years, 9 months, 37 minutes, 45 seconds. And then the next value, 25 years, 9 months, 37 minutes, 46 seconds. You can go on to infinity with this, and it's really not helpful. It's helpful in some statistical applications, but for your applications and what you may be doing with this, discrete variables are much easier to deal with, like age, which can be either one, because we defined age as just a solid number per year. And then frequency. So it's the number of time the variable occurs within an age bracket. So back to our chart again, if I look at this 36 to 41, right, and I see that there's about 47 people that occur there. So it's a little bit different of a way of looking at it. And then let's say if we go back to the chart again, and then we look at 30 to 35, we have 37, 38 people. If I refer back to this again, the most important term that gets so misshapen in histograms is these bins, these bars. They're called bins, they're called classes. They're also called intervals in some cases. That's a more statistical application, but you may see them referred to as either a bin or a class. And the reason why it's called a class is you think of it, excuse me, from 18 to 24-year-olds, right? So that's a class. The bin is just another way of expressing that. Think of it as a basket, right? So you have a basket, you put 20 apples in it. You have 18 to 24-year-olds. So you collect all the 18 to 24-year-olds and you put them in a group. That would be a bin. So the way that you construct the histogram is it's not tricky. It's just you need to know just a couple of rules. You need to figure out how many bins you want to use, right? And that depends on what you're analyzing. So I mentioned here there's no correct number and there's not. Common thinking says between 3 and 7. 2 really isn't going to tell you too much. 3 may start to tell you things. 7 is probably the maximum. If you stretch it out more than 7, you might not know what you're looking at, right? It may kind of spread the data out too much, so you don't really see a frequency that you're trying to analyze. So to calculate this, first of all, you want to put all the, let's use age, right? You want to put all the ages that you want to add into this histogram from youngest to oldest. That's called a range. Now, I've arbitrarily said that I want to use 6 bins. I think that would basically give me the kind of information I want. And if you look here, right, it seems to be a pretty even spread, which it needs to be. It gives me an idea based upon these bins, people that I've put in like 18 to 23-year-olds, 24 to 29. That's a pretty good indication. Folks in that kind of age cohort, if I'm looking at my programming and I want to make sure that I'm serving the needs of the people that are, 24 to 29 and 36 to 41, my programming for 24 to 29 is going to be a little bit differently than 48 to 53. However, I understand then from that graph how many folks that I have in each one of those age categories. And I set those age categories based upon my knowledge of how people accept the programming that we have for them. So I've put everything into an age range, 18 being the youngest, 49 being the oldest, okay? And then I find the difference between the youngest and the oldest. In this case, it's 31. 49 minus 18, right? So 31 becomes important because when I want to figure out the bins, you could call it the width of the bins or the category of the bin, I divide that 31 by the number of bins you want. So I have a real number that I calculated between the youngest and the oldest. And then I have the number of bins that I want, which is an arbitrary number that I pick because I think I'll get the right distribution. And I get 5.1666 repeating. Now you can't use that number, but you just round up. So now I have 6 bins, and that's how I arrived at the 6 bins here. So based upon what we know, and this, by the way, there's a continue button because we're going to turn this into a tutorial. What we know now, that number 6 doesn't represent the number of bins. It represents the age ranges within the bins that I want to have. So I start out, since the youngest is 18, so I count 18 through 23. And that's how many people go into that bins. However many ages I have, 18 to 23, in this case, it's about 14. That's what makes the first bin. The bins have to be of equal size. So the next one has to be 6 data points as well, right? So if I go here, 24 to 29, there's 6 data, the bin is 6 data points wide. And I'll show you what that looks like here. This is how I established the bin width. From here, you can build the histogram. This is actually taken from Excel. So these are the actual frequencies, and this is all made up, just basically to kind of prove the point. And it's not horrendously hard. There's just a few simple things to do. You just want to make sure that you have the proper number of data points. You want to make sure that you've picked the appropriate number of bins. And then you want to make sure that when you calculate the bin width or size, that it's all equal, it's all the same. So there's as many data points between 18 to 23 as there are 24 to 29. And then you just count the number of times something occurs within that bin. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's questions. And you can come off mute, you can type it in the chat room, either way. Oh, good. Thanks, Mara. Because sometimes I get confused with this myself. But yeah, it's, you know, the interesting thing with this is that if you look for information on it, people use histograms a lot in statistics. You know, they talk about having a frequency distribution and then adding in standard deviation and then blah, 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 blah. And your mind goes numb after a while. It doesn't have to. This is a really good tool to kind of, you could understand your population. And again, dealing with a variable, but you could understand if, for those of you in a clinical environment or deal with viral suppression rates, viral suppression percentages, you could do the same thing with percentages, right? And you could see then where your outliers are. And that's another thing that this is telling me is if I look at this and I say, okay, so I have 14 people in the age range of 18 to 23. Am I really serving them well? Okay, Deborah, it's actually, depending upon how you set up your table, it's probably not the same as the bin, because the bin is a calculated thing. And the bottom line is, if you calculate it the same way, you could use a table. But when you calculate for the frequency distribution that we're talking about, you're putting a whole nother spin on this, so that what you're building here, and it doesn't have to look like this, all right? It's probably not going to look like this. I did this deliberately to, you know, kind of show everybody what this ideal one looks like. But this is a way of, if you put it in a table that reflects the bin numbers, frequencies, this is just easier to see, right? But if you take that table that I put in here, now I can look at this and I can say, okay, I have 14, 18 to 23. And that's fine, 14 people, you know, and then I have 17 people down here. But when I go to this, it's easier for me to see, and this becomes an easier tool to present, if you will. Because remember, you're doing these things for other people as much as you're doing it for yourselves. We will always want you to do deeper dives into your data. This is one way of doing it. But this is also a tool to, you know, talk to your senior management about, or talk to the executive director about, say, oh, look, you know, our program is geared towards 18 to 23-year-olds, and we can't keep going to the zoo every year. We have a whole nother range of folks that, you know, don't really show up for these things and don't find it as a draw to our agency. And you'd be surprised at what this is going to show you. It's just meant to kind of put the push the envelope. For a question, I've already been some responses. Oh, okay. Let me see. I already have bins in my response choices, so response already come back pre-formatted. I export the data into Excel and it comes in as a table. I can then just create the histogram from the data. You should be able to, Debbie. I'd really have to see it. Deborah, it's, I didn't put a step-by-step thing in here. It's in Excel, and again, I was leery about doing it simply because there's so many different versions of Excel now that people have. I just spoke to somebody that had a version of Excel from 2002. Just, it's all across the board. And if I explain it in the current version that I have, fortunately, you know, I'm part of the New York State Department of Health, and we seem to have an unlimited budget for Microsoft Office anyway. So I have the latest toys. Not everybody does. I wish they did. But Debbie, the only thing I could tell you is try it. Oh, there you go. She did try it. That's one success story. Okay, class over. No, I'm glad it worked. So does anybody else have any questions? I want to move on, if that's okay. Okay. So now we're going to go to the Pareto chart. I am hoping you have all seen things like this before. These are really very handy to do. It really kind of focuses your efforts on where you can spend your time improving. If we look at this chart, and I did this years ago in an older version of a how to make charts in Excel tutorial. It's about TB tests. When I worked in the community, one of the programs I had was a TB testing program that was funded through NYU was the caretaker for the program. I don't know who funded it or who the direct source was. Anyway, it was to do kind of mass TB testing. And we did it in selected neighborhoods where demographically, or I'm sorry, epidemiologically, we knew there was a high incidence of TB. So one of the things we looked at was people aren't coming back for their tests. So if they're not getting read, you never know if they have TB or not. So I kind of made this up based upon some of the things that we all speculated on. So either the test wasn't done and we, unfortunately said the patient was non-compliant. The test was done, but the client didn't return to have the results read. So the tests were done, but they weren't placed in the proper section in the medical record. So the reason the arrow points from 80% to the orange line, right, is that this is the Pareto principle, which basically says that 80% of the problems, 80% comes from 20% of the issues outstanding. In this case, there were 3 issues, and this doesn't always work out to 80-20. Believe me, it rarely works out to 80-20, but it gets close enough to 80-20. So Vilfredo Pareto was an economist, Italian economist. And I find this just a very interesting story, so I'll just give you a 30-second view of this. He found that 80% of the wealth was in the hands of 20% of the Italian population. So economists over time became more focused on data analysis and scientific methods of discovery. He never said this is the Pareto principle. He never took credit for a Pareto principle. It evolved over time. But in honor of Vilfredo, it became the Pareto principle because his work was a pretty landmark work in 19th century Italy. It's also important to keep in mind, it's a bar chart and not a histogram. It's just a bar chart with another piece of information added into it, right? So if I'm looking at this, what I'm seeing is that 80% of my non-compliance is in these 3 areas. So, and again, you can chat, come off mute, whatever you'd like. But where do you guys think that you would spend the most time to address? In other words, from an improvement standpoint, what do you think you could go after that would have a pretty significant impact and be fairly easy to do?
Can I just clarify something?
And for anybody that gets the right answer, there's a salad spinner and a set of Ginsu knives that we will send you.
Kevin, did you hear Debbie? She had a question.
Wanda wanted the knives.
Can you hear me?
Wanda's correct.
Okay.
It's
Just
fairly
to
easy to
clarify,
make
those
sure that
first
it's
3
put in the
columns
proper
are
section
the
medical record.
80% that the Pareto rule is talking about?
I mean, if the test isn't done, it's not done, right? It's not an improvement project. That's, oops.
I don't know why he can't hear us.
No, I cannot. Debbie, are you talking?
Yes.
Okay. Zoom is, don't get me started. Yes, Zoom is buggy. Debbie, you want to take another shot at it?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So just to clarify in your chart here, the first 3 columns
Yes.
are what compose the 80% of the 80-20 rule. And
Yeah.
that's why you have the arrow there?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So in other words, out of all the records that I looked at, 60 people did not have tests done. So I'd hardly call them non-compliant, although you could make a case for that. So then there's about 32 people that had the test done, but the client didn't return to have the results read. So then here on the third bar from the left, about 28 people had the test done, but the results weren't put in the medical record in the correct area. So when I add the percentage piece on the right side, right? And again, Excel does a lot of the calculations for you. Wanda came up with the right answer first, that the one that you can really address very quickly is placing the test results in the proper section of the medical record. Because when you think about it, it's much harder to get people back to have the results read or to get them to come and take the test in the first place. So what it really helps you to see is where you can make a change that will lead to an improvement, that will also kind of fit into a priority matrix. And if anybody's seen a priority matrix, where you want to be is something that has a really good impact, and that's fairly easy to do. And this third one here doesn't even involve the client really. It just involves record keeping. So that's one way of eliminating this. But this entire chart shows you that 80% of the effect comes from 20% of the causes. And this somewhat represents that. And there's a really good video on YouTube that I referenced down here, and you'll get a copy of these slides. There's a really good YouTube video that explains this. So it helps you understand that approximately 80% majority of contributing problems and how to attack them. If you break this up the right way in a bar chart, you can really see what you can go after and what you can address. And yes, you can then allocate resources to try and address the problem. For instance, getting somebody to put the information in the correct position in the medical chart. And again, it's really good at showing you where 80% of the problems exist, which is in this area. I don't know if you guys can see my cursor moving, but here's, you know, the 80% of the problems in this area here. And the rest of it, not to belittle it, but there's other things here that, yeah, you can address. You can pick these things off one at a time. For instance, if you look at the last one, I don't know if this is practice anymore, but when I did this, chest x-rays could be given in place of the test. It's a little harsh, but nonetheless, it's effective. So does anybody have any questions, comments? Does anybody use Pareto charts in their work? And you come off mute if you want, or type away. Okay. Ah, Wanda, yes. Richard does as well. So Richard, do you want to tell us how you use them?
I will try, yes.
Okay, thank you, I appreciate it.
Yeah. So we looked at factors impacting our patient's decision to switch from our in-house pharmacy to another pharmacy.
Oh, nice.
And then found that the biggest factors were, other way around. Reasons why folks would want to switch to us, right? Like what would make someone switch to use us?
Okay.
And then hours, because they wanted to support our organization, or something else, right? Those were the biggest factors that could impact someone's decision to want to work with us. And so we looked at that. All right, there's not a ton we could do with the something else category. right?
Yeah.
But it sounds like an important factor is knowing that the pharmacy directly supports our clinic, right? So if we shared and talked more about that partnership, would that encourage more folks to use the pharmacy that way?
Interesting.
Yep.
I like it.
And then same with, there was another one. I'm just having pulling up all these old emails. I think that's all I got right now. But thank you.
Okay, that's fine. No, thank you. I appreciate it. Wanda, what about you? Could you explain to us what you use the Pareto chart for?
I will try. I hope
Okay.
you understand me.
Oh, sure.
I used to analyze the case manager plan of service, all the areas that are not compliant with the frequency or the screening that case manager doesn't do. So that some of the areas I use the Pareto chart, because this tool is very useful to identify what we need to work with to achieve compliance with any measure.
Okay, I think that's great. Thanks, Wanda. So for those of you who may be in our collaborative, the Create Equity Collaborative, one of the things that we've been looking at is why people sign up for it and then over time aren't able to kind of move forward. So you could use something like this. So let's say in theory that I'm going to look at this. I'm going to look at all the people that just, I'll call them dropped out, for lack of a better term. So I could make, I would collect the reasons from them. And in this case, I'm not making it up, right? I'm collecting reasons. And some people might come back to me and say, it was, COVID was just too overwhelming for us. I would expect that to be my biggest response. Then maybe my second biggest response is staff turnover and people resigning. That might be 80% of the reasons why folks dropped out, just in those two categories. So now that's helpful to me because I know that I can't do anything about COVID. And I can't do anything about staff turnover. What I can do is try and make, for the folks that have stayed, try and make their participation as fruitful as possible. So they walk away with something, some knowledge base that maybe they didn't have before. So that's just kind of one way you can use this. And you heard of two other ways you can use it, but it's a pretty powerful tool. And it gives you a good idea, again, where the majority of contributing problems occur. And then you would use other tools like a priority matrix. And if anybody's interested in what a priority matrix is, I have a fillable one that I developed as a form. Just email Shimei and let us know. And we'll maybe, you know what, Shimei, maybe we'll just send it out to everybody. I mean, in worst case, you just delete the file. But it's helpful. It's a good tool to have, and it's a good resource. Are there any more questions about the Pareto chart? Oh, there's something in the chat room. Oh, okay. All right. So the last one we're going to talk about is the scatter plot. So this, this is an ideal scatter plot. Most scatter plots don't look like this. What you're looking at here is correlations. So that's why you use a scatter plot. You want to examine correlations. So there's a few things going on in this chart right away that I'll point out, and then we'll talk more about it later. If you look up here at about 200 pounds and 60 inches in height, that's an outlier. There's one data point, somebody that's 200 pounds and 60 inches in height. Okay, you can see all the other data points that are kind of scattered around this trend line, but they're very snug to the trend line. So the other thing to look at is this trend line is going up, right? So now let's see why all this is happening. I mention this simply because some people use the ASQ website a lot, but scatter plots are one of the 7 tools of quality. I don't know if we've ever attributed the 7 tools of quality to one person. It's just kind of evolved over time. You know, it's like one of those things where you say, well, they say that this happens. We don't know who they is. You never know who they is. So we never know who developed the 7 tools of quality. But if you go to the ASQ website, there's a lot of good things on there. The 7 tools of quality probably are about 80%, maybe 75% of what you'll ever need to analyze your data and break it down. What scatter plots are good for is looking at a correlation or to prove a correlation between 2 sets of numbers. So it's 2 variables we're looking at, right? So if I go back to this chart, I'm looking at weight in pounds and height in inches. And what I'm showing here with my made up data is that there's a correlation, because all these points are snug to the line, that there's a correlation between weight in pounds and height in inches, which kind of makes sense, right? I threw in the outlier just to show that you can have outliers. If these data points were all over the place, it would be a very weak to none correlation. And then the other thing that I'm looking at here is a positive correlation. The trend line is going up. So what I'm saying is the positive correlation is that the more your height is in inches, the more you probably weigh. So you use this if you want to see a correlation, right? If you want to prove a correlation. Sometimes there will be, sometimes there may not be. Now, negative correlation could be if as your age increases, your viral load goes down. That's a negative correlation. Now, there's many factors that go into that, but that line then would be exactly the opposite. The points up in the upper right-hand corner would now be pointing downward, and these points would be pointing upward. So does anybody have a question about that? I love these little cartoons. And again, you can calculate this in Excel, depending upon the version you have. What about the outliers? Thank you, Wanda. So the outliers, let's go back to the chart. So the outliers, if there's just one outlier there, there's still a strong correlation, but there is an outlier. If there's a lot of outliers, that sort of weakens the correlation, right? It may be to the point where there's a very, very small correlation, if any. So the outliers are important in a scatter plot to look at, see where they are, and see how close to or far away from the line, the trend line they are. And again, the trend line is something that Excel does for you, but there's a Indeed.com, which I believe is a website for jobs, which I'm not advocating anybody leaving their job, but Indeed.com has a real good piece on how to calculate a correlation coefficient. That's if you want to get into the math of it. So if a correlation coefficient is equal to 1, there's a very strong correlation. If it's equal to -1, it's a very strong negative correlation. And there's everything in between. So let's say if you want to look at viral suppression and gender. Again, we just made these things up for the purpose of the tutorial. If you want to look at the funding parts A through D, and the average viral suppression rate. If you want to look at how age might relate to weight. There's a world of things that you can examine to see if there's a correlation or not. It'll start with an idea. So back to the outliers again. The outlier there is labeled, and again, it's the only real outlier that's far away from the trend line. And does it have an effect? It'll probably have an effect on the calculating the correlation coefficient, but you'll still get from this graph, you'll get a very strong positive correlation coefficient. And that's what this is showing you. I mean, it's important information the more you look into it. This is a negative correlation, right? So this looks at age and average viral load. And this is saying that as age goes up, the viral load goes down. And again, this is data that's used for demonstration only. It's not copied from the real world of anything. But it's what an ideal negative correlation looks like. You will rarely find something where every data point sits on a nice trend line. They're clustered around the trend line. The further away they are from the trend line means there's a weak correlation, if any at all. So when you get something like that, I would point you back and say, okay, figure out the coefficient of the correlation coefficient. So you have a real mathematical, precise measurement of what the correlation is. The reason why, again, you would calculate is because it may not always be obvious what the correlation is or the strength of the correlation. There's another step-by-step tutorial on this that I put in here, as well as the YouTube demonstration. And just to summarize again, it's looking at the relationship between two variables. And the thing that I can't stress enough about correlation, it does not mean causality. There's a Latin phrase called post hoc ergo propter hoc, right? And loosely translated, it means after the thing because of the thing. It is 95% not the case. So keep that in mind, that just because you see a correlation, just because it's after the thing, it does not necessarily mean it's caused by the thing. It just means that there's a relationship. So age doesn't cause a weight gain per se, right? Aging doesn't decrease viral load per se. So I'm going to stop there because the next section is resources, which I will show you in a minute, but I want to see if anybody has any questions. Has anybody ever worked with correlations before? Does any, or hopefully everyone, see where this could be helpful in your quality improvement work? Okay. Again, it's Excel. Oh, good. Okay. Thanks, Dominique. Oh, good, Debbie. Good. Excel will do it for you, depending upon the version you have, but and it's good at these kind of charts too. It likes, you know, dealing with just two variables. Okay. So as I said, there's some resources. ASQ is, I point people to ASQ all the time because A, I'm a member. I'm not encouraging anybody to join, but they have a lot of good stuff. And their search function is really good. They have templates for all kinds of things. I believe they have a correlation template as well. So a lot of the Excel stuff is done for you. And there's another page of resources, which is calculating the correlation coefficient in Excel and how to calculate it by hand if you're really into math. But again, the correlation coefficient is, if you're going to work with these, it's good to use because again, you have this, you know, nice solid calculated number. And the closer it gets to a -1 or 1, you can see strong correlations. If it's a 0.03, not so much. So does anybody have any questions about anything that we talked about today? And we will be sending the slides out. Okay. While you're thinking, I'm going to beat Shimei to telling me to launch the poll. So if you would, we do one of these polls every time we do a TA call, simply because it kind of steers us in the right direction. The one question I would, I wish I was a professor, although I don't like the whole publish and perish thing. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't introduce myself, did I? Such a nerd. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, I'm Kevin Garrett. I'm the senior manager of CQII. We are here to answer your questions. We are here to help you through this. If you want to talk more about this, I'll be more than happy to do it. You know, I'm not a math whiz, but I use these things mostly to teach other people. Well, thanks, Elizabeth. I appreciate that. But one of the things I'd like to know from you guys is, do you find these kind of mini seminars on tools and stuff like that helpful? Oh, good. Okay. Oh, excellent. That's good feedback. Thank you. Because I'm so, you know, Debbie, that's a good question. I've done a couple of the other tools, line charts, bar charts, pie charts, and they, you know what, Shimei? Let's send out the first one that I did with these. Oh, okay, tool time is there. All right, thanks. So Debbie, that's where you would find the first presentation on the tools. I didn't cover all the 7 tools of quality. Some of them, like a checklist, believe it or not, is one of the 7 tools of quality. And I think that most of you have probably used checklists in one form or another. So, you know, again, ASQ really explains these things well. There's other things we've done that are not 7 tools of quality, like control charts. Thanks, Justin. So actually, I know we don't have a tutorial on cause and effect diagrams, but I have a lot of materials that I've developed over the years on that. I don't have anything on a check sheet. Don't think I have too much on flowcharts, but I do have a tutorial on control charts. And the second part of it is also talking about variation and identifying it through control charts. That's all. Oh, okay. Ah, okay. Well, thanks, Justin. Thank you, Richard. So anyway, if anybody thinks of something they'd like to see in the future, some tool that maybe they've heard about, chances are we may or may not, we probably don't have something on it, but it wouldn't be all that hard to come up with part 3 of this or volume 3 of this. So any more questions? Oh, yes, thanks, Shimei. Justin knows way much, believe me. It is true. And Justin also is, yes, he definitely has fans. Oh, okay. Brainstorming and affinity diagramming. I have stuff on brainstorming. So I can point you in the right direction. Debbie, if you send me your email address, I will get you some information on brainstorming. I don't think I have anything on affinity diagramming. But I'm sure I can come up with some resources for you and point you in the right direction. Okay, let me write this down. I'm just gonna stop sharing for a minute and open up my email. Okay, good. So I got it. So if there are no other questions, thank you to all of you who filled out the poll. We always appreciate that, and we appreciate your feedback. Shimei posted my email, so if you think of anything after this, let me know, and I'll be more than happy to get you an answer. Until then, everyone, stay well, be safe, and take care of. Oh, wait. Okay. All right. William, I got yours. Just want to make sure. Okay. Got it. All right, everyone. Thank you. I appreciate it. And you all take care.